Hey, this is Bill Simmons from the Bill Simmons Podcast, here to help you make the most of your summer with Michelob Ultra, a superior light beer worth playing for. Play for it with the guys when you're competing to see who can sink more birdies on the golf course, because winning tastes even better with Ultra on the line. Play for Ultra. Fill your fridge with Michelob Ultra this summer. Enjoy responsibly. Copyright 2025 Anheuser-Busch Michelob Ultra Light Beer, St. Louis, Missouri.
Big news. Sephora is now on Uber Eats. So if you find yourself facing a beauty emergency, like needing a last-minute gift, or you're just out of your favorite mascara, again, don't panic. We got you. Order now and get $10 off on Sephora orders of $50 or more on the Uber Eats app. Order now. Offer ends October 30th. One order per customer. Additional terms apply. See app for availability. Delivery fees may apply.
That barricade. I remember reading some like actor's book about like the behind the scenes of Broadway, and everyone who was in Les Mis said that the barricade always got stuck, and it was like just a nightmare of like beautiful for the audience, but a nightmare to actually be on it. I'm so excited to talk about the ITBR Book Club, which is free and virtual. We are meeting this month on October 26th, a Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're reading Lucy Undying, a Dracula novel by Kirsten White, plus Bram Stoker's classic, iconic Dracula. So I can't wait for us to discuss both books. And to join, just email me at ivorytowerboilerroom@gmail.com. I will give you a Zoom link to the book club. And you can also head to our Instagram at Ivory Tower Boiler Room or our Facebook page and just send me a direct message for the Zoom link. Can't wait to see you all, and please spread the word to all your spooky season literary lovers. Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Andrew Rimby, aka Andrew. Thank you so much for listening to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room podcasts. And before you hear today's episode, which I just know you're going to love, can you please do me a favor? And wherever you're listening, if it's Spotify or Apple, please rate and review us. Make sure you're following the podcast. Share it with friends, family, anyone you think would just love hearing this conversation. And you can watch our podcast on YouTube. Yes, we have a YouTube channel. It's called the Ivory Tower Boiler Room, and you'll see the video episode. So please make sure you like the video you're watching and comment. I always respond to the comments. Also, we have a Patreon. So if you don't want any of the ads and you want bonus material, join our Patreon. There's a 1-week free trial. It's patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room. And the free trial is for the professor level. Without further ado, here is today's exciting episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. It's Dr. Andrew Rimby, joined with a really exciting repeat guest. You're all in for such a musical theater treat. I love Broadway Nation, David Armstrong's podcast, but now we can add author to David Armstrong's long resume, which I'll soon read, but his new book is called Broadway Nation: How Immigrant, Jewish, Queer, and Black Artists Invented the Broadway Musical. He is a writer, producer, host of the Broadway Nation podcast, more than 200 episodes. As he just told me, it's reached more than 300,000 listeners, which is an incredible accomplishment. During his 40-year career, he's worked as a director, producer, playwright, choreographer, led theater companies across America, as well as off and on Broadway. He's best known for his work at the Fifth Avenue Theater in Seattle, where he served as the artistic director and executive producer from 2000 to 2018. If I remember correctly, that's where Hairspray originated, and we talked about that when he first came on the podcast, so listen to that episode. During his tenure at the Fifth Avenue Theater, he produced 19 new musicals, 9 of which moved to Broadway, so that includes Disney's Aladdin, A Christmas Story the musical, Gotta Love the Tap Dance, You'll Shoot Your Eye Out number. I love that number. And the Tony Award winning Best Musical Hairspray Memphis. And his whole book originated with his course that he taught at the University of Washington School of Drama. So, David, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be back and to talk about all this. I love to have someone who's so excited about musical theater to talk to.
Well, I absolutely love musical theater, and I absolutely am so excited that your book has entered this, textbook, university, just Broadway enthusiast catalog. So I have to ask, I know that this has been years in the making, and in your acknowledgments, you talk about when you were hired at University of Washington School of Drama to do a whole course on the Broadway musical. Like, how did that come to be? How did they approach you? Maybe that origin story there.
Sure. I had been at the Fifth Avenue Theater in Seattle from 2000 to 2018, and which is a very high profile position. So in the theater world, and was involved in collaborations in various ways with the University of Washington School of Drama over the years. So when I stepped down from that position, it probably was something that seemed natural to happen. I'm very grateful that it happened, but they approached me about would I be interested in teaching a course at the School of Drama. And of course, I was immediately interested, but then I had to figure out what I was going to teach. And of course, they wanted a history of the Broadway musical was the idea. They also wanted a large lecture course style that would attract students from all across the campus, not just drama students, which I'm happy to say it's turned out that way. So it's a very popular course that fills up practically overnight when the admissions are open. And but I wanted it to have a specific focus. There's a lot of ways to teach the history of the Broadway musical, and I have with my long career, that you just recounted some of, makes me feel very tired and old. I had a lot of opinions about it, and I had a lot of thoughts about the history of Broadway. But what I did know, and what had been, and this is not an idea I completely originated, but I think the idea of, because there are books out there, there are documentaries about the Jewish influence on the Broadway musical. There are a lot of books about gay influence, especially from the audience's perspective. I was more interested in the creator's perspective, but that's out there as well. So there were elements of this, but I wanted to fold all those things together. And my thesis was that the musical is primarily the creation of these marginalized groups. And as I started doing the research for this course, it was very evident quickly that I could back that up completely. And it was even more so was that a fact than I even knew before I started doing the research for it. So that it becomes it's an outsider art form is absolutely a fact from the beginning and sustained throughout the 125-year history of it.
Did you find that it was difficult? Like, did this project come from a lack of resources or hard to find resources to kind of piece together the Broadway musical history?
Some of it was hard to find. Some of it, I think had never been gathered together before. So most of the research that I did came from other authors and other books. I've done very little, but very little, firsthand research. It's mostly drawing on the research that other people have done, but that is not been widely noticed or centered in the discussion. And so my job was to collate all of that and put it all together and sort of demonstrate that this is not a series of little one-offs. This is a sustained narrative, really.
Well, and I think it's incredible that you do this interwoven amplification of these marginalized groups. Like, yes, like you've said, yes, we know that Jewish
creators really had a hand in the formation of what we know now as the Broadway musical. Like we'll get into it, the golden age and that whole explosion that happens on Broadway, but also like female creators and queer creators and Black artists, and that they're all, kind of merging together as artists at this time. And I just having taught, not as long as you have, of course, not aging you, but with your expertise on the Broadway catalog. But I even remember when I taught a Broadway musical course that a lot of like the resources out there are similar to like Dr. Stacey Wolf, who I've had on, and I know you've had on your podcast. And
Quoted in the book quite liberally, yes, with her
yes,
permission.
and
Yeah,
her work on Wicked, and I think her book is called Changed for Good, and
absolutely.
very feminist theory analyses of these musicals. And like there's a lot of interpretation that exists like that on Broadway, but not necessarily a concise history specifically of these marginalized groups who all had a hand in creating the spectacle of what we now know as Broadway. Is like that's something that just kept motivating you, is okay, I need to like at least tell this story.
Well, it was something that fascinated me is that the interaction between these groups, which is probably the least discussed aspect of it. We've talked about them in sort of silos, but these are artists, these are professionals who are working side by side at the same time in the same space. There are just as many Black creators of the Broadway musical working in between 1900 and 1910, which is a story which I really didn't know. That is a discovery that I had. Most people will tell you, and I just read something the other day, Shuffle Along is the first all-Black Broadway musical, which comes in 1921. It's a very, very important show, but it is not there are 20 other all-Black Broadway musicals before Shuffle Along on Broadway. And then what else we don't know is that there are 20 after it in that same decade that it inspires this whole wave of musicals. So those two waves of musicals, of Black musicals especially, 1900 to 1910, these are rough ideas, 1921 to 1930 something or other, are so underreported and underappreciated and are sort of mind-blowing when you look at what was going on. And those are on Broadway side by side next door to these shows that we know much better and we've heard about, but they're just as big a hits. And the interaction between those artists, being an artist, having worked in the theater, I know how that works. We respond to other artists that are in our sphere. It doesn't work. Artists don't work in silos in that way, especially theatrical artists. There's a great story that Cassine Gaines tells in his book called When Broadway Was Black, that Irving Berlin would come multiple times every week practically to Shuffle Along and sit in the first row right behind U.B. Blake, who was conducting the orchestra, and then talk to him during the show and say, I love that lyric. And there was this great that's the part that fascinates me, is the interaction and the interconnectedness of these shows. It was crucial that this be a full history of the Broadway musical. So then one of the challenges was that it had to include all of this stuff that is normally in most full histories of the Broadway musical, there's not space for, there haven't been time for. These stories of these other artists have been woefully underrepresented. So now they needed to be represented, but it still needed to tell the full history of the Broadway musical. And that was a big challenge, and not have the book be 800 pages rather than 400 pages.
Well, you did such an excellent job of accomplishing your plan. I can attest as a reader, David. And I'm curious, like, did you find that these communities, it does seem like there's also, you're taking us through segregated, how these communities sometimes have been segregated to the stage, like say the Yiddish theater in its early formation, and then starting to have like more integrated casts. Like, did you discover that there was a moment where integration even drastically reshaped the Broadway stage, like where you actually have Black and Jewish performers together or Black and Jewish creative teams. Like I'm thinking of even Dreamgirls. Like if I remember Dreamgirls, the creative team, they're Jewish, but it's almost an all Black cast. Um,
Yes.
so, you know, what did you find with like the segregatedness of the stage?
What's so interesting about this, and I talk to students about it often, and they are often sort of amazed because we think of progress as being sort of like a continuous uphill, a slow, maybe very, very low grade, but continuous rise of progress. And the reality is that it goes in waves and dips and up and down. There were more Black people on Broadway in 1926 than there are today.
Wow. Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yes. So we don't think that way. We think, and so that's one of the fascinating discoveries of this, but it's also one of the, the tragedies of it too, is that we don't learn. We keep going through these cycles and then we go through the eras of great liberation and great opportunity, and then we backtrack from there.
Mm.
I show pictures to my students from musicals from the 1970s, the early 1970s, starting with Hair, which is the late 60s, but in through Pippin and Godspell and just that whole series of shows that were the shows I grew up on, because I was a teenager at that time and then a young adult. And I show these pictures and I say, what do you notice about them? What stands out to you from these production photos? And, a bunch of things do, but they'll say, well, there's lots of people of color in these photos. I say, yeah, that's the way musicals were in the 1970s, in the early 70s. Every show was, no matter the subject matter, that was the style, for lack of a better word, the what artists wanted to put on the stage, wanted to represent the world in that way. And then we backtracked completely in the 90s. And we went to with shows like Les Mis. And I mean, for a lot of reasons, those shows happened. Phantom of the Opera, we just sort of went. And there was this period then where Black people and people of color of all kinds are underrepresented substantially, where they were very represented at various periods and the same thing with the authors, with the writers, with the creators, with the directors and choreographers. There was a period of Black artists being front and center and then being sidelined.
Mm. Well, and to now have Gypsy led by Audra McDonald and, having Joy Woods and the lead characters, the majority being Black, like, is that something that would have even been translatable or could have even happened after Ethel Merman? Like, could Audra McDonald have even been cast in the late
Well,
50s or 60s?
I mean, it's not so different from what happened in the late 60s with Hello Dolly,
Mm.
which David Merrick, the producer of that, the created an all-Black cast of Hello Dolly starring Pearl Bailey, which initially he put out on tour and then was such a giant hit, brought that to Broadway, where the show revitalized the show. And we can talk about how we might feel about an all-Black cast of something. But at the time, it was a sensation, and it was a liberating. It was a totally forward thinking. Although I think David Merrick was doing it for financial reasons. He thought this will work. Pearl Bailey's a great star. This is a great idea, and he was right. And then there were a series of shows, guys. There was an all-Black Guys and Dolls that came after that. There was an all-Black. OK, a show back from the 1930s. So this is not something entirely new. What's new in the Audra McDonald production is they are instead of it sort of being color blind casting, or as my friend Sheldon Epps calls those all black shows, sort of dipped in chocolate like productions where you just have put a glaze over the whole show. Uh, this one is color conscious casting. They have actually are approaching the story as if these characters are black in a white world, and as much as they can within the way the show is written, are trying to tell that story on top of the story of Gypsy, which has been, which has been more or less successful depending who we would talk to and who approaches it. But overall, I think has been a success.
Yeah. So you take us through so many interesting early moments, and I mean, I feel that an age and period that isn't as well understood or maybe not discussed a lot is like what you call this silent age. Like what, or not silent. I'm sorry.
Your question.
Sorry. I'll edit that out.
Yeah.
What you call the Silver Age.
Yes.
So, what is happening here in the Silver Age, and even like, how did you piece this together? Because I assume that there's a lot of these musicals, or I'll call them like vaudeville type shows, that you might not even be able to find the music to, or there might be only fragments that exist from some of these shows. So like, how did you put together the Silver Age section?
Well, first of all, I had to make up the term the Silver Age because it's very surprising, but among theater historians, musical theater historians, there's very few agreed upon names for the various eras of time, or even agreement on when those eras happened or if they ever happened. So almost everybody will talk about the golden age of Broadway, but some people will say that starts in the 1920s and goes all the way to the 1960s. And for me, that's just too big of a section of history to grapple with. And I'm always interested in the turning points, the major turning points in the development of the musical. When did the shows change substantially to something new? And usually it's a generational reaction to what the generation before was valuing. Excuse me. It's those kinds of things that create these changes. So part of what I was looking at there with the Silver Age is there is a series of shows from the 1920s and 30s primarily. Probably the majority of Broadway musicals ever happened during those 2 decades. There were hundreds of shows, hundreds and hundreds of shows. That happened, and shows could be a hit and only run 3 months or run, it was a different era. So the economics were very different. So there were lots of hit shows that didn't need to run for 10 years the way a show does today, or would have to run for 500 performances or 1,000 performances the way shows would in what I call the golden age. So my first thing was, how do I separate, how do I just categorize the Broadway musical? So I came up with 5 really different sections there. I came up with what I call the Genesis era, which is the earliest days of the Broadway musical when it's being invented. And that sort of ends with World War I, with the 1920s, basically. Then I decided that it couldn't all be the golden age. There had to be the golden age for me was going to start with the opening night of Oklahoma, when something very new and different defined the Broadway musical, was introduced. So if that was going to start there, what was that period in between? So I decided to call that the Silver Age. And you're right, that period is a lot of the shows were very loosey-goosey. They were often, some of them we still know very well. We know Anything Goes. Almost none of those shows are produced today, with the exception of Anything Goes. They are just, and it's not because the songs, probably a lot of people consider that to be the golden age of Broadway because of the songs that came out of it. If you're just looking at it in terms of Broadway songs, then I can understand that all of that would be the golden age. But I'm more interested in the shows and the impact that they have. So there it is chopped, but there you can find much of that material. You have to go. I spent time at the at various libraries, especially in New York, at the the Lincoln Center Library for the Performing Arts, and you can read the script to Too Many Girls, or read the script to any number of those shows, and they're usually in manuscript form. They're often, got handwritten notes written in the ledgers, which is, interesting to see. That detective work is quite fun, actually. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the music from that era, not the scores themselves, but the songs, of course, exist and were big hits and were recorded by, in hundreds of various versions.
Mm. So songs like, It's Still Lovely, or
Someone to Watch Over Me, or going back to Give My Regards to Broadway, which is really from the Genesis era. But Gershwin, Porter, Noel Coward, all the sort of classic, the majority of classic songwriters and classic Broadway songs actually come from that era in terms of the Great American Songbook. When you think about the core, repertoire of jazz singers and throughout history, still that's the era they mostly draw from. Mm. Much less so than the golden age of Broadway, which is the Rodgers and Hammerstein era. Of course, those are great big songs and, famous songs as well.
So, I know you also do such an interesting distinction of, how, it's not cut and dry, but each age also prioritizes different elements of the creative team. If I remember, you say that there's a difference between what the golden age, like Rodgers and Hammerstein, their composition, what their music and lyrics is really highly connected to telling the narrative. The songs need to tell the story, where in a more Silver Age, it's more, just enjoying the music, but you could take out the songs and the script remains intact, or the storyline remains intact. It's more just, enjoyable music. And I guess that's where it does seem a little more vaudeville-like, where it's more just kind of about the spectacle of the performance, but not really about the storyline. Is that correct? Now that the fall season is here, you may be wondering, okay, I had all of these beach reads, Andrew, but now I don't know what books to read for the fall. Well, guess what? My friends at the Gay and Lesbian Review magazine have you covered. Their new September and October issue, called Forgotten Histories, features wonderful book recommendations, TV shows, and films that help excavate LGBTQ history. So, whether you're interested in learning more about the connection between shopping and the gay community, which, I have a Home Goods and Marshalls addiction, as my fiance knows, they got you covered there. They have an article about the attraction of Confederate gentlemen by the incredible writer Andrew Holleran. There's an article about the French evolution of sexual identities, and even the first LGBT riot, which happened in 1953. Go over to glreview.org. You can get either a digital subscription or a print subscription. I love my print subscription, which I'm holding up right here. And with the exclusive code ITBR Choice, you will get a free issue with your subscription. So ITBR Choice, put that in the promo code section and get your hands on the Gay and Lesbian Review print or digital subscription. I know you're going to love their magazine.
Wish you could become a morning person? You know the type, up before the sun, early morning runs, first one to the office with donuts and a smile. How do they do it? Easy. With the new Galaxy Watch 8, sleep tracking and personalized insights from Samsung Health help you improve so you can wake up to a whole new you. One who, dare I say it, skips the snooze? It's possible. Train your sleep with Galaxy Watch 8. Learn more at Samsung.com. Requires compatible Samsung Galaxy phone, Samsung Health app, and Samsung account.
Purina believes no one should have to make the impossible choice between their own safety and their pets. But nearly half of domestic abuse survivors delay leaving because they can't bring their pets with them. Through the Purple Leash Project, Purina is helping create more pet-friendly domestic violence shelters so survivors and their pets can escape and heal together. Visit Purina.com/purple to learn more.
Absolutely. And that progression of the way the storytelling changed is what is so much the subject of the book. In those earlier eras, in the Genesis era and the Genesis period, and then the Silver Age, those shows were largely driven. You have to always think about who's driving this bus. And in those days, it was the stars of the shows and the producers were the people with the most power calling the shots. So shows would often be written around the talents of the stars. If we hired you to be the star of the show, we would then create a show that showcased what you did, and sometimes maybe even included songs that you were famous for, and we'd squeeze them into the plot of this show. And it was all it was all at the service of as you just said, of sort of the pure entertainment value of it, the vaudevillian aspect. Many of those stars were vaudeville stars prior to that, so they would bring their persona and their material with them into the shows. During the Silver Age, the writers start to take on more importance and start to have an idea that, and Hammerstein is at the core of this, but not the only one doing this by any means, that the story should be the most important thing, more important than the stars, more important than the music, even if it were just trying to stick in a song that we think is fun, even though it's not related to the plot, that somehow the story will define things, and then Rodgers and Hammerstein will take that to a new level, and the writers become the main focus and the power. They are now driving the bus. It's a Rodgers and Hammerstein musical. And most of them and a lot of them did have stars initially, but then went on without the stars and were just as big a hit without the stars in them. So they were not star-driven or star vehicles anymore. They were Rodgers and Hammerstein vehicles. Then other people, especially directors and choreographers, start to take on more importance as we move into the modern era and into the late era of the golden age, and they become the ones, Hal Prince and Bob Fosse and people like that, who are driving the bus now, even more than the writers. And I think to a certain extent that's still where we are today. That is largely true today, although certainly writers, there's probably been some balancing. And of course, if you're talking about somebody like Lin-Manuel Miranda, he's driving the bus now with his great success, but he necessarily wasn't driving the bus that strongly at the beginning, because part of it is based on clout.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like when I had Chad Beglin on to talk about showmance, but also, doing the lyrics for the prom.
Mm-hmm.
It's like not everyone knows right away, oh, this is his oeuvre of what he's done. It's more like, oh, well, we know the prom because of the Netflix adaptation and Meryl Streep is in it. And it is interesting how, like you said, David, that we still have these leftover golden age ideas, I guess, with the industry, but also, now I feel there's also such a focus on like what's happening in the West End with, say, Jamie Lloyd is a good example. that you have Evita and Sunset Boulevard, and like, well, what's he going to do next? Like, how's he going to strip away the elements of the spectacle of these shows and actually look at it from a new angle? Like, do you feel that that's something he's doing something innovative, or is that something that's always kind of been present in the Broadway industry? Like, he's kind of returning to an early form of the Broadway stage.
I don't think I'd say he's returning to an early form, but I do think there always have been uh, dynamic, bold directors, conceptual artists, and there's stagers as a name, as a word I like to use, because and several of the people I've sort of highlighted in the book are these people who invented Broadway staging, which often involves choreography, and sometimes they were choreographers and sometimes they were also lighting designers, but they were the idea, how do you put this show on the stage with bold impact, has always been there from the very beginning. There's a gentleman named Hassard Short who's featured in the book who directed and staged dozens and dozens. I don't have the exact number at my fingertips here, but dozens and dozens of Broadway shows, and probably is one of the single most important people in the development of the Broadway musical who almost nobody knows his name.
I was going to say, I've never heard of his name, so
no.
This is new to me.
No, I mean, most people would not know who that is, but everybody who came after him was influenced by him. And if you could go back and interview Bob Fosse, he'd probably say, "Oh yeah, I know what Hassard Short did. I paid attention to that. And he's even there." But no, he was still around when Hassard Short. I mean, Hassard Short were still working into the 1950s.
Wow.
So these are people, again, these people all overlap. And Hassard Short worked with everybody important in the business, all the famous writers, all the famous stars. He's just one of them. There's probably 12 people like that, maybe more in the book, who are completely lost to history to a great extent, unless you're really a nerd historian. And even then, you'll find very little about them in most books. So I think Jamie Lloyd is no different than the only difference, I guess, is his focus is on revivals and on reinterpreting things, and that's a fairly recent thing. Is that shows are going to be revived multiple times and reinterpreted multiple times.
Does he have like a partnership with Andrew Lloyd Webber? Because like it's just interesting that everything he's reviving is an Andrew Lloyd Webber hit. No, well, spectacle show and hit show.
I mean, I don't. I'll speak out of school here without any real knowledge of this, but my understanding is that Andrew Lloyd Webber hates both of those shows and is appalled by the staging of them, but is happy to collect the checks.
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, hey, if the money's coming, I'm sure he's not disappointed.
That's gossip from the Rialto, as they say.
Yeah, that's not your Andrew Lloyd Webber.
I did not interview exactly. I did not interview him, and this is not a direct quote.
No,
but my understanding is that it's not. But then you have to give credit to Andrew Lloyd Webber for being open enough even to allow these things to happen, and he certainly could shut them down in a second if he wanted to. I'm the same thing with the reinterpretation of Cats, which is coming to Broadway, I hear. So, yeah, I do think this kind of rediscovery, and I think that's something, I don't go into this too much in the book, but that's something that comes from the British theater and those the British revival of Carousel that happened back in the 80s or early 90s. I'm trying to remember what year that was, where I think that started this pattern of we're going to take a classic Broadway musical and drastically reinterpret it. Prior to that, revivals usually recreated the original production. So, especially while the authors, when Rodgers and Hammerstein were still around, and many of their shows were revived on Broadway multiple times, but it would be the original sets, the original costumes, the original stars sometimes. We were going to replicate that original experience. And the new thing that happened in the 80s and is continuing today is we're now going, and this is, probably very much related. So there's a reason it's started with the people from the UK, is because they've been doing this to Shakespeare for, you don't recreate the original production of Hamlet because, first of all, nobody knows what it was, but they wouldn't even think about that with most plays. You're going to do a new production, a new interpretation, and sometimes a radical revisioning of the show. And that started to be applied to Broadway musicals starting in the 80s and has become sort of part of the modern era zeitgeist of that. So the idea that you're going to bring Sunset Boulevard back for the third Broadway revival, or the second Broadway revival, but the third run on Broadway, and have it be drastically different than a show that really is only 30 years old to begin with. I don't know what year that was originally, but some 40 years old, I guess, is new. That's something new. Would have any show that was revived within the 40-year lifetime of its creators previous to that would have recreated the original production.
Well, it's interesting because, A Chorus Line just celebrated its 50th anniversary.
Yeah.
And I do feel like I saw A Chorus Line at City Center a few years ago, and it was a replication of the original. Like, I don't, like, in a case like A Chorus Line, they tend to always, go back to literally the line. And I don't know if there's a lot of reinterpretation that could be done with that. I'm sure someone could try something, but, like, I hear talks of reviving Hairspray, and like, I'm curious, just because you're so close to Hairspray, like, could you imagine a drastically redone version of Hairspray? Now that the college semester has begun, you know that there are so many books that I can't wait to recommend to you all. Well, my favorite independent publisher, Broadview Press, has some incredible books that have just come out. One of them I'm actually using in my writing course. It's called Writing on Fire, a fierce yet friendly guide to writing humanities essays in college by Rachel Tukolsky. It is such an accessible and interesting book that includes writing exercises for your students. I highly recommend it. Another book that you should get your hands on, especially if you are a writing or English professor, is Academic Writing Now by David Starkey. It includes wonderful, popular essays, nonfiction essays that you can use in your classroom, and they cover a wide range of genres. I cannot wait to use them in my courses. And another book just in time for the Halloween season is Vampire Literature and Anthology, co-edited by Robin Warner and Elizabeth Lewis. I had both of them on the podcast, so listen to that episode because you're going to love all of the vampire literature we talk about. Use my exclusive promo code, go to broadviewpress.com and use the code Ivory Tower for 20% off your order. Yes, 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Are you a fan of classic Hollywood movies?
Are you a fan of queer cinema?
Then do we have the podcast for you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Christian Garcia.
And I'm Luke Del Mar.
And we are your hosts of That Old Gay Classic Cinema, where we take a look at some of the greatest films of all time and analyze them through a queer theoretical lens.
Let's be honest. LGBTQIA+ people have been a part of Hollywood since its inception, and this podcast celebrates those artists and entertainers of yesteryear while also taking a closer look at the queer-coded characters and stories in classic Hollywood films long before queer representation entered the mainstream.
So follow us down the road of classic cinema as we give you a guide to some of the films that touched our hearts brains, and even gave us courage to be ourselves.
You can listen to That Old Gay Classic Cinema wherever you get your podcasts, and be sure to follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok.
All right, listeners, we're ready for our close-up.
Like, would that be something that they would take that direction, or would it be like, let's just have that nostalgia of staging it again?
I mean, that's a great question. There were some discussion of a revival like 10 years ago, I guess, where it was going to be a recreation of was going to be Jerry Mitchell's choreography. It was going to be the same set, the same. It was going to be which is what they're doing with Mamma Mia right now. Mamma Mia is coming back to Broadway. I think it's playing now or opens very soon, and it is the exact same production of Mamma Mia that we saw originally on Broadway and that we see around the world. Partly because all of those creators in that case are still alive, very much alive, and still involved in that show, and I think probably want to have their work continue with it. Hairspray is the same story. All of those creators are with us and responsible for the hit that Hairspray was. Does that mean it couldn't? Of course it could be reinterpreted. Of course it could have new sets, it could have different sets, it could have different staging, it could have completely different costumes, and has in productions, in regional productions or various productions around the world. So partly that becomes a question of, again, who's controlling the show, who's driving the bus. And I think the original producers, although Margot Lyon's not with us anymore, I think probably are still very much involved with that. But it'll be interesting to see. Maybe they will think that the best way to revitalize Hairspray is to reinterpret it. I have no reconnaissance on that, but I'll let you know if I hear anything.
Yeah, thank you, David. Well, it kind of reminds me of how Legally Blonde had a West End out in the parks, or I forget what the exact production was, but it was like an open air theater, and like having more of a body positivity. Like, it's not necessarily going to be a blonde. Actually, it was a Black Elle Woods, and like embracing her body, and it didn't have to be a Barbie doll type image. So like, I guess in that way, there's like ways that they're reinterpreting just what does it mean to, be an Elle Woods in this world. So that's interesting. I'm curious. I feel like, so many shows that I grew up with are going to have revivals, and I'm curious to see, what the new generation thinks of them, just because like I have my, Hairspray love and memories. And to have a new audience is going to be very fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, certainly you will disappoint some people if you don't recreate that production. So that's part of the thinking that goes into it. But, it's counter to what I just said. Both Les Mis and Miss Saigon were reinvented by the original producer with entirely different creative teams. Now, some of that was economic. We can say it wasn't necessarily for artistic reasons, but it still happened, and those shows remained successful and remained, giant draws. So that didn't seem to hurt those shows that original Barricade and Turntable and everything were no longer part of the production.
That Barricade. I remember reading some like actor's book about like the behind the scenes of Broadway, and everyone who was in Les Mis said that the Barricade always got stuck, and it was like just a nightmare of like beautiful for the audience, but a nightmare to actually be on it.
And is there a loss in those cases? I actually think in that case, Trevor Nunn's original staging, John Carrot and Trevor Nunn's original staging of Les Mis was a work of art, was sheer genius. The way they used that turntable, the way the scenery came and went, the Barricade for me was the least part of it because it was seemed a little bit like just a big gimmick. It was spectacular, but and then the way they used the barricade once it was there was also was incredibly wonderful. So I in some ways I feel bad that audiences today won't ever see that staging again. And so there's that. It's the same thing with a chorus line. You could do a chorus line without Michael Bennett's original choreography, and sometimes it's been done that way. But what are you losing by doing that? What are you gaining by doing something new? It's a trade-off.
Well, and Bob Fosse is such an interesting example in your book because, like, I love teaching Bob Fosse specifically to teach the way that his vision is so part of our foundation of understanding choreography, but also the themes in these musicals that he had his hands in. But, even when he's in Kiss Me Kate and Damn Yankees in the film versions, and you can see that he has his choreography, his mind already spinning of like, okay, I'm going to innovate the industry, like, of these feel good musicals. I think it's very rare that you actually have someone who is an actor choreographer who then becomes a director. I mean, maybe there are others too. I mean, Lin-Manuel Miranda, of sorts, but what is it like Bob Fosse? He's like on the cusp of these these creative stages, and Stephen Sondheim like being part of the West Side Story team. Like, was it interesting for you to see those who kind of bridge the different moments in Broadway history and then innovate the field?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm very fascinated by those artists who were able to cross over to the next era, which was a very, very hard thing to do because the style of what they were doing had changed so much, the content had changed so much. And just looking back, to the break between the Silver Age and the Golden Age, there's some significant Silver Age artists who are able to find a way to thrive in this new way of working that they didn't grow up in, and they may even been resistant to, and sometimes even have their biggest hits in that new way of doing things.
Would this be like an Ethel Merman, David?
Well, certainly from the performer standpoint, absolutely. And in this, but I was thinking about a show that starred Ethel Merman was Annie Get Your Gun. We have Irving Berlin, who's from the very beginning of the Broadway musical, like one of the first originators, and then we have Dorothy Fields, who's a prominent figure in my book, the great, amazing lyricist. Her brother, Herbert Fields, who is this great gay inventor of the Broadway musical. He's involved. He's one of the people I would hold out as being one of the most undersung but crucial inventors of the Broadway musical. All of them create the show Annie Get Your Gun, which is produced by Rodgers and Hammerstein in this couple-year period right after Oklahoma, where this new idea, and in some ways they demonstrate with that show. And Cole Porter is another one almost at the same time with Kiss Me Kate, finding a way to take their talents and adapt them to this new story-driven kind of musical theater, where the story is more important than the songs. And then write the greatest songs ever because they're telling them, writing the story. I tell a story about how resistant and doubtful that Irving Berlin and even Cole Porter were that they could adapt to this new way of doing things. And then were able to thrive. And then Irving Berlin goes on to write 3 or 4 more big hit shows in the Golden Age. Same thing with Cole Porter. They have this sort of third act, both of them. Dorothy Fields goes on to into the rock era and even writes some rock songs for her final show, Seesaw, in 1970.
Oh, wow.
So some great songs and Sweet Charity. So then she's one working with Bob Fosse. So Bob Fosse, I would say now to your point, is there are a couple of people like Bob Fosse, Gower Champion to a certain extent, who cross over from the golden age into the modern era and find a way and have their biggest hits in the modern era in this new style of creating shows that's markedly different from the Silver Age style of thing. And so you look like Pippin would be a great example of that. Think about the difference between the kind of show that Bob Fosse's first Broadway show, Pajama Game, is, and the kind of show that Pippin is a drastically different kind of way, a much darker world. And then how Prince is another one of these people who is very successfully, and Sondheim, cross from the golden age into the modern era and have tremendous impact on it. So I am fascinated by that because not everybody was able to do that. Most people just were fell by the wayside when these big shifts happen. They can't exist in this new dynamic, this new paradigm.
Finish training for the day? Time to fight post-workout fatigue with Core Power Protein Shakes. They're packed with 26 grams of high-quality protein to build muscle and electrolytes to help hydrate. The nutrition you need to help your body replenish, rebuild, and repair post-workout so you can power on to the next one. Champion your recovery with Core Power. Visit corepower.com to learn more.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Yeah, well, and I feel like you've just had an author who wrote a Stephen Sondheim book. If you want to shout him out, David.
Sure. This week on my podcast, as we're speaking this week on my podcast, is Richard Shook, who wrote a terrific new book called How Sondheim Can Change Your Life. And what I was fascinated, it's a very, very good book. And when I picked it up, I thought, is there anything left to say about Stephen Sondheim? And Richard has found a dynamic new way to talk about the work of Stephen Sondheim. It's not a self-help book the way the title might suggest, but it does, and in some ways it kind of ties into the last section of my book, which is where I talk about the great themes of the major, most ubiquitous themes of the Broadway musical, and how those, I believe, have affected American culture, partly because they're so it's so clear that these are the themes of the Broadway musical, and then the Broadway musical has been so popular, and these are the themes of the most popular Broadway musicals to almost exclusively. And of course, so then millions of people have been affected by these stories, been affected by these themes, been affected by this kind of worldview, cultural view. And that's partly what Richard's talking about too, is what do these shows teach the audience in the most, and I use teach advisedly because, and you're a teacher, I think we all try to teach in a way that is subversive so that students don't know that they're learning something at times, because that will be more effective. Exactly. It's like trick them into learning.
Well, and Sondheim does that so well. I mean, his songs, you don't lose yourself in the songs. I feel every word is meant to be part of the thematic element. Like each song is a monologue of sorts, I would say, in Stephen Sondheim. Like the allegory is important, and the figurative language, and
totally.
Yeah, I think they say Stephen Sondheim is the best for actors who are singers, or you don't have to be like an incredible belter to sing a Stephen Sondheim song. I mean, it doesn't hurt for some
certain
songs.
ones you do, but I think what they're saying is that the songs give you something to focus on that you can convey and have an impact regardless of whether you have the greatest voice in the world. Whereas if you're singing, we'll leave people unnamed, but other Broadway artists whose primary focus is musical impact, that then if you don't have a voice, then you can't do anything with that song. You have no, it gives you nothing else to focus on.
Yeah, like if you don't have a bell and you're singing Defying Gravity as Alphaba, the audience is going to be pretty disappointed.
Yes, although I think that show has some very good lyrics. So that I think that
very good lyrics. No. Not putting down the lyrics, but I think like when it comes to Bernadette Peters, she's a wonderful vocalist, but she's also just an incredible emotive actress.
Absolutely.
Through the music. But we're ending our time together, David, which I knew this would go by quickly, but maybe like just something I'm curious about is, so many in the Broadway community, like whether they're directors, producers, actors, those who are composers, even, do you feel that there are some who are more drawn to the history of the Broadway musical? Like, I want everyone to get their hands on your book, but like, are there some who are really interested in these different elements? Or I don't want to say that you shouldn't have actors be invested in the history of the art, but do you think that like in this industry, there's just some who are more deep diving Broadway enthusiasts?
Absolutely. And I do think it depends on their role. I think if you're talking about directors and choreographers and writers, they tend to be very knowledgeable and very interested and have focused on the history of Broadway and have studied it and been intrigued by it. Certainly that was like my case. Partly I know all this stuff because I had a long directing career where when you direct a show or you choreograph a show or write a show, you have to do research. Maybe there's some people who don't, but I think most people are drawn to the research to inform what they're going to do. I think with performers, that's less so. But there are big exceptions to that. I know many, many performers who love to delve deeply into the history of whatever the character is they're playing, whatever the show is they're doing, all that kind of stuff. And then there are other people that are just more instinctive, and there's no right or wrong there. So I know some of my favorite performers ever who just come at it in a different way and don't necessarily, and are interested when they need to be about those kinds of things. So I do think it's largely driven by the role you play in creating a production or creating a musical.
Well, that being said, everyone should at least at their bedside table have Broadway Nation.
I mean, I do think all students, especially performers, young performers, will benefit greatly. I'm sometimes appalled at what people don't know about the history of Broadway, or it only goes back to, very, very recent history. And part of what I think is the most interesting part of this that I've been the most proud of is that I've worked very hard, and I didn't really have to work hard because it's easy to see these connections, but I've pointed out that this is a continuum. The history of the Broadway musical is one line that continues, that starts in 1900 and before, and continues unabated right up to whatever the current thing is that's happening now. And you can connect the dots between all of those things. So in my way of thinking, you can't really do a show today without knowing where it all came from.
Yes,
and you
will
need
benefit. The legacy, history.
It's this one thing led to the next. Mm-hmm. And one artist handed off the craft. It's like a medieval craft passed from one person to the next, one, sculptor to the next, taught this one, who taught that one, who taught this one. And you can trace that directly, from one show, one artist, one performer to the next throughout the history. So it's all connected. If you're interested, from my point of view, if you're interested in what's happening on Broadway today, then you will be interested to see how we got there.
Yeah. Like if you're interested why so many films are now being turned into musicals, it's not like, there isn't a history of popular culture informing the Broadway stage.
Absolutely. And you'll see that at the very beginning, it was established very quickly that most shows were going to be based on a play most of the time, or a novel or something, some pre-existing story, because it was very practical. You were more likely to succeed if you did that. It wasn't from, we are going to do something that will be familiar, and sometimes it's done that way today. We just want to have something that's already pre-branded that people know, and oftentimes that doesn't work, because then you're just trying to replicate this previous thing. But if what you're doing, and I've said this before, writing a musical is one of the most difficult things anybody can accomplish. It's up there with brain surgery. I mean, and maybe AI can do brain surgery, but I don't think an AI can write a Broadway musical that's good. And writing an original story is also one of the hardest things you can do. A story that really works, that is newly told, is something that is truly original. You put those two things together in one task, and you are almost guaranteed to fail. You cannot write. It's very, very, very hard to write an truly original story for a Broadway musical. We've had some success. Some people will succeed with that. Dear Evan Hansen is an example of that. Next to Normal is an example of that. There are certainly examples. Bye Bye Birdie is an example of that. You want to go back, but they're like, you can count them on two hands out of the hundreds and hundreds of shows that existed. Stephen Sondheim based 3, maybe 4 of his musicals on movies. Now, he was smart enough to take movies that maybe weren't that were great, but people didn't know necessarily, and reinvent them. He wasn't, let's do Back to the Future and just put Back to the Future on the stage as close to the movie as we possibly can. I find very little creativity in that and very little value in that. And that just becomes nostalgia. People are going to get us something. They want to have an experience of what they already experienced before.
Yes.
And which is fine. It's, if that's what people want, but you'll find very little reference to that in my book, because I'm more interested in creative artists who've created something new, even if they're working from existing material.
Yeah, no, so well put. And, just one brief question, which is, David, what do you know, or like, what have you seen about Stephen Sondheim's last musical? Is it called Here?
Here we are. Here we are. I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, you broke up a little bit in that. So can you ask me that question one more time?
Sorry.
You froze for a minute.
Yeah. Sorry, David. So
that's right.
What do you know about Stephen Sondheim's last musical, Here We Are? And like, is it something that do you feel is really reflecting on our current anxieties in culture?
I did not have a chance to see it either at the Shed, where it was last year in New York, or now it's playing in London. That they're just closed, I think, at the National Theater was just there. And so I'm really sorry that I didn't have a chance to experience that. And of course, people seem to be fascinated by it. And it is a contemporary story set in contemporary times. So that it's not clear to me what the impact of it's going to be, or even how widely it will get produced. I feel like right now there's a great deal of interest in it because it's his final work, most likely. It wasn't finished when he died, so it's been sort of cobbled together to a certain extent. I don't know to that too pejoratively, but I do think they had to do some work to finish it. And it was done by the collaborators that he was working with, so well informed in that regard. And I don't think they would have done it if they didn't think he would have wanted it to be done. And I suspect he would want it to be done. But from all reports, it's very, very entertaining and engaging to a certain extent. And then you feel like, oh, it's not really done. It never was finished. Okay. It never was completed. So there's a certain, how many audience members who are not obsessive Sondheim worshipers will want to experience that beyond this, and there's a lot of people who do. Obviously, it had a very successful run in New York, was sold out. I think it was sold out largely at the National Theater. So there's this wave of interest in it, but I'll be very interested to see if it has a life beyond that, the way all of his other shows have.
Okay, well, so my last question is, I'm going to choose a few overtures that I did a few TikToks just talking about how exciting it is to speak with you and your book. And I had someone, David Britt, who loves Broadway and like tells his students that an overture is a call to worship of sorts, which I might steal. I think that's a good analogy. But
yeah.
So he said his favorite overture is Oklahoma. My friend Luke said his is Gypsy. My friend Ryan said Wonderful Town or Dear World. And then I said my favorite Sweet Charity. And then the Onstage blog said Carousel. So out of those overtures, David, which is your favorite?
Of those overtures, and I like all of those, but I definitely would go with Gypsy. I think it is the most exciting. It is the most. It just never. It's like a complete sort of show in and of itself. It just keeps finding ways to engage you and thrill you and surprise you, and then has that final section that just practically stops the show before the show's even started.
Yeah. Is that your favorite overture of all time, or is there a musical that beats
It's definitely
Gypsy?
I'm always hesitant to say anything is my favorite of all time because things shift and change, and it depends what day it is and what week it is. But it's definitely on the list. It's always on the top 10, probably the top 5 list of overtures. An overture probably most people won't know as well is the overture to the revival of No No Nanette in 1970. Is one of my all-time favorite overtures. It's just, again, so exciting and fun and energizing. Just
and eventually
draws you in.
We'll have to have an off-air conversation at a later date, David, about why so many new musicals have just scrapped overtures completely, which is like a pet peeve of mine. But I also understand, overtures. Not everyone wants to sit for 4 to 5 minutes.
I mean,
and they
most
want to get right
shows
into the musical.
Most Sondheim shows don't have overtures.
That's true, except if I remember Follies.
Follies has a prelude, sort of an exciting one, but actually it was staged. That was the entrance. Everybody was entering the party, and Merrily We Roll Along has one of the great overtures. That's another one of my favorite overtures. And that's one of a rare Sondheim that has an overture.
Yeah.
Little Night Music has a beautiful opening sequence and that night music theme, but again, the show is started. It's not something before the show.
Well, I'm gonna have to listen to the No No Nanette because I don't know that musical that much, so I need to listen. Well, David, as always, I love having you here. Hopefully, I'm sure our Broadway passion will connect again.
Our worlds will
With
collide again.
something.
Yeah.
Yes. If the Stephen Sondheim musical comes here to Broadway, we'll have to see it and talk about it. But in the meantime, everyone can satisfy their Broadway sweet tooth with David's new book, Broadway Nation: How Immigrant, Jewish, Queer, and Black Artists Invented the Broadway Musical, available wherever you get books. And listen to David's podcast, Broadway Nation. And where can they follow you on social media, David?
You can find me everywhere, David Armstrong, Broadway Nation, on Twitter, on Facebook. I have if you like my podcast, come and join the Facebook group. There's about 3,000 other fans of the podcast there, and it's really fun and lively. I'm happy to have you there. And so I think that's the main places. Yeah, and certainly Instagram absolutely as well.
Yeah. Oh, and you have a Patreon too, right?
I have a Patreon-like.
Yes.
It's with Supercast is the venue, but it's basically the same thing as Patreon. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
yeah,
so
come join us there.
Join David there. Well, David, thank you so much. I had so much fun always talking with you.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you. I love talking to people with enthusiasm about Broadway.
Yes, we have lots of enthusiasm. Thank you, David. That was so exciting.
Good. I'm glad. It was fun. Really fun. We could go on and on and on, but yeah, it's so hard to know.
I could just go on all the time about Stephen Sondheim. Yeah,
I would love to if you would send me an MP3 of this. If with your permission, I'm going to put it out as a bonus podcast episode on my podcast. If you're up for that, I can wait till after you release it, obviously, or we can figure out whatever timing works for you.
Here, wait, let me just see. We have some storm coming.
Oh, wow.
Let's see. It's my internet. That's why we have some flash flood happening. Well, at least I'm inside. But yeah, no, that sounds great, David. I will edit the video and then I'll send you the audio version when it's edited. So I would love that. And yeah, if you want to put it out right after I put the episode out, that's fine. Yeah. So that would be great. No, thank you for doing that. And I'll also create a little cover art and I'll send that to you on Instagram.
And you're going to
collaborate.
And when you release it, obviously I'll get it out to everybody, and you're on your podcast and on YouTube, I assume.
And on YouTube. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So the video version will be on YouTube, and then, I'll release to all the podcast platforms, but I'll keep you updated. I think I'm going to release it hopefully middle of August.
Great.
Right before the school semester starts. That way we can get more Broadway musical teachers, scholars interested.
Absolutely.
I'm still trying to convince my university to let me teach a Broadway musical course. So hopefully.
What is their resistance? Do they have somebody else who wants to do it, or they just don't have the funds to do it?
No, I mean, I think it's more they just have to figure out what electives it'll count as for non English majors or theater majors. Yeah.
I didn't say this, but part of the popularity of my course is it fills two requirements. It fills both an arts requirement and a diversity requirement. So, of course, people can get 2 in 1. It becomes very, very popular. In that regard. Yeah.
No, that's good. That's good. Well, thank you, David. And
thank you, Andrew.
I hope you have a good rest of your day. And, hopefully sometime when you're in New York City, let me know, because I live right outside of the city. So,
cool.
We'll have to put our Broadway minds together.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, have a good rest of your day. Thanks for doing it, David.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.